Hey guys, my name is Rollen. The stories you are about to hear are a culmination of true, fictional, original, and pre-existing stories, read by several talented narrators, myself included. This was a massive undertaking for a group project, and I want to take the time to thank everybody who was able to contribute. I also want to extend my thanks to every narrator that I approached with this project, but who was unable to take part. A list of the narrators who are featured in this video, as well as the original stories where it applies, will be listed in the description or comments below, as well as on screen. Do please take the time to visit each of these creators' channels if you haven't already, and show them some support. As I said, each of them are extraordinarily talented, and I'm grateful that they were able to take part in this little project of mine. I also want to let listeners know that there are some stories in here that may be triggering to some. There are subjects including child abuse, gore, and things of the like. With that being said, please enjoy these stories, and have a happy Halloween.
This is my little one's very first Halloween where we let him go trick-or-treating on his own. His mother and I have always been very protective of him, and so we will often very closely monitor where he goes and what he'll be doing. Maybe some would describe us as overbearing, but I think it's more prudent to be extra cautious, especially in our situation. But he's getting a little older now, and I have to admit, he's mature for his age. He said he wanted to go out for Halloween night, and after discussing it with my wife, we decided it would be a good idea. Maybe even a good lesson in responsibility for him. I mean, he's got to learn sometime, right? We can't be over him 24/7 making sure he's safe. First things first, he would need a costume. My wife and I would handle that part, as we were more experienced. It took some time to acquire, but we found the perfect costume for our son, one that would fit him perfectly. Fit was everything when it came to costumes, we found. Next, we had to make sure he knew how to behave, what he should do, what he shouldn't do, who he should trust, where he should go and who to call in case of an emergency. You know, all those things. Now, you might once again be saying we are being too overbearing, but it's better safe than sorry. And finally the day came, October 31st, and he was ready and excited for his first Halloween out. Maybe a little too excited. I had to stop him as he was about to run out the door to join the trick-or-treaters on the street. "Hey, bud." He turned to look at me impatiently. "Don't you see anything wrong with your costume?" He looked down. I sighed. "Bud, humans wear their skin with the smooth side out. Now go put it on correctly before you go." I'm so proud of him. He's gonna have a fun first Halloween.
When I was 10 years old, I moved into a foster home. My deadbeat parents went out for cigarettes and beer one night and never came back. At least, that's the story I've told for the past 30 years. But now, I finally feel like I should tell the truth about what happened the night they disappeared. I was an unplanned mistake that they kept for the welfare benefits. Growing up involved bruises, black eyes, the occasional cigarette burn, and daily verbal beatdowns. One day near Halloween, a flyer arrived in our mailbox about an arts and craft fair at a nearby park. When I got the mail after walking home from school, I begged my mom to take me. She always let me put out our meager collection of decorations for the holidays, and I was excited by the prospect of finding something cool for Halloween at the fair. She said it was just a stupid fair, but I could go if it would make me shut up about it. She wouldn't give me any money, though, because they couldn't afford it. Although, They had no problem buying cigarettes and beer all the time, but last time I brought that up, it resulted in a slap across the face. When the day finally arrived, I grabbed my rusted bike and rode to the park with a pocket full of change I had saved from constantly checking payphone coin return slots. I took the shortcut through the woods past the rusted car frame littered with cigarette butts and beer bottles where the cool high school kids hung out. The woods opened up into a grassy field with a baseball diamond, playground, and a couple soccer fields. Cars filled with happy families drove into the dirt parking lot and headed to the various tables. I set my bike down against a tree and browsed the pictures, jewelry, and knickknacks displayed at the vendors' tables. Everything was so much more than the $1.55 held in my pocket. I started to cry as I left the last table, realizing I was too poor to buy anything. Dejected, I headed back towards my bike with my head down, wanting to just keep pedaling as fast as I could to get as far away as I could. All of a sudden, I bumped into another table that I hadn't noticed before, right beside my bike. "I'm sorry," I said as I wiped the tears from my eyes. "I didn't see you there." The old woman sitting at the table didn't say anything. She just waved her hand in front of the trinkets on the table. Her thinning gray hair was matted down on her blistered scalp, and her face was weathered and wrinkled. I looked at the items on the table, and they all appeared to be Halloween-themed. There was a mummified corpse coming out of a tomb carved of wood, a clay sculpture of a 3-headed wolf standing on its hind legs, holding a smiling, severed head, a girl with long flowing dress and long red hair sitting atop a broken oblong skull, and various other items. These were so detailed and finely crafted that I was sure they were too expensive for me, so I said, "Thanks, but I don't have enough money," and turned around to leave. She started tapping her nail on the table to get my attention. I turned back around and she reached into a bag next to her, pulled out a new trinket and slid it towards me. I asked how much it was and she shook her head no and pushed it closer to me. I reached into my pocket and tried to hand her what little money I had, but she just pushed my hand away and shook her head no again. After thanking her multiple times, I picked up my new decoration to get a better look at it. There was a small house with busted windows and a boarded-up door. On the back of the house was a small key. I turned the key until it wouldn't go any further and let it go. It emitted a series of clicks as the door opened up, and a tall, thin figure wearing a tattered black suit with a top hat and leaning on a cane followed a track I hadn't noticed at first. It moved slowly and jerkingly until it stopped a little ways in front of the house. A long, bony arm reached up and took the top hat off its ugly, disfigured face. Skin was hanging off its left cheek, and the right side of its head was missing an eye. Its jaw hung down in a big, open-mouthed smile, with long, flat teeth, and it took a bow before going back inside the house. It was a little odd and creepy, but I was not one to turn down something free, so I held it carefully, grabbed my bike, and turned back to wave bye to the old lady, but she was already packing up her things. She gave me a wave and a smile as I got on my bike and pedaled back home. I set my bike down in the grass and ran inside, excited to set up the new decoration in my room. My dad was slumped over in his chair with the Lions game on. My mom was in the kitchen smoking her cigarettes and watching something on the free portable TV they got from attending some cell seminar. I walked slowly by them, trying not to be heard, and went into my room, closing the door quietly behind me. I wound the key again and set the decoration down on my dresser. Nothing happened. I wound it again, but still nothing. I guessed that it must have broken already, and I lied down to go to sleep. I was awoken by a clicking sound and looked up at my dresser. The door to the little house opened up and the figure came out. It stopped outside the house and leaned on its cane, staring at me. The smile was gone from its face. Just then, my door opened and my dad stumbled in, yelling at me for not doing the dishes. He smacked me a few times and then stumbled out. I heard a light tapping noise coming from my dresser and wiped the tears from my eyes to see the figure tapping its cane on the ground and staring out the door that my dad had gone. He then went back in the house and the little door slammed shut. This happened a few times over the next week with different reasons for my dad being mad, and once my mom, followed by various displays of anger from the figure. The night before Halloween was particularly bad. My mom and dad were both drunk and had friends over. They thought that it would be funny to use me as their servant. I had to keep bringing them drinks, and they threw stuff at me whenever I took too long or accidentally spilled anything. Late in the night, my mom's ashtray filled up, so she reached over and put her cigarette out on my arm. I ran crying to my room while they laughed. I noticed the figure had moved off the decoration and was standing on my dresser, slamming his cane down over and over. He then pointed his cane to my bed as if to tell me to go lie down. I climbed into bed and closed my eyes as the little figure watched over me. Somehow, I fell asleep quickly from exhaustion and trauma of the day. A piercing scream coming from down the hall in my parents' room woke me up just after midnight. I quietly opened my door and leaned out to look into their room. The moonlight shone in through their windows, and I could see the tall, bony figure leaning over the bottom of the bed, with his cane pushed down on my dad's chest. He had grown about 7 feet tall, and his mouth was biting down on my dad's leg. His big, flat teeth were grinding back and forth across the bone. Then I heard a loud snap as its powerful jaws broke right through the bone. My mom and dad were both screaming as the figure's mouth moved further up my dad's leg and began grinding its teeth back and forth again. My dad tried to pull away, but the pain and pressure of the cane must have been too much. My mom jumped out of bed and ran behind the monster. It forcefully swung the cane around, tripping her and knocking her into the wall. She crumpled into a heap on the floor, moaning in pain. My dad looked over at me and let out a weak cry for help, but I just stood there, unmoving, and watched the violent spectacle unfold before me. After a couple of minutes, one of my dad's legs was completely gone, and he looked to be passed out from the pain. My mom slowly started crawling towards me. The monster walked over and lifted his cane high above his head. He then brought it down with such force, it went right through her leg, pinning her to the floor. The monster went back to work eating my dad's other leg, followed by his arms, torso, and lastly his head. My mom listened to the mashing and grinding of the bones until there was a short moment of silence as the last of my dad was gobbled up. I felt nothing as I watched the monster walk over to my mom and bite each finger off, one by one. as she continued to scream. He then devoured her in a similar, methodical process, and when he was finished, he walked over and stood in front of me, towering over me. His eyes, an empty socket, felt as if they were staring into my soul. He stayed there for a minute and then removed his top hat and took a bow before walking out of the house. I cleaned up the floor, threw away the bedding, and called the police the next day with my story about them going for cigarettes and beer and not coming back. I kept the house decoration without the figure and put it out every year, except for the last few years. These last couple years have been rough for me. I was laid off and unable to work for a long time. I didn't mean to hit my son and yell at him so much. I promise, I'm not like my father. I can be good again. You have to believe me. You see, I just left my son's room and the house was sitting on his dresser. As I walked out the door, the familiar clicking noise caught my attention. The little door opened and the figure was back. He stopped just outside the little house and stared at me. He then began grinding his teeth back and forth. Halloween is almost here, and I promise I will be good.
This is the story of one Halloween in 1955 when two all-American high school kids go on a date. Joey and Susie are high school sweethearts, and, by all accounts, good kids. But this night will change them forever. The night for Joey and Susie would be just like any other night, but in just a few short hours, the line between reality and fiction becomes a nightmare.
Hello? Oh, hi, Patsy. Yeah, I'm getting ready for my date with Joey. I can't decide what to wear. Should I wear my pink sweater with my gray poodle skirt? Or should I wear my black poodle skirt with my white sweater? Okay, thanks, Patsy. I'll go with the pink and gray. Oh, Patsy, he's so dreamy, and I just love his eyes.
Elsewhere. Hello? Hold on, let me get him. Joey! Kevin's on the phone! Don't take too long. I don't want that butthead running up my phone bill. Okay, Dad. Hey, Kevin, what's going on? No, I can't hang with you and the guys tonight. I've got a date with Susie. Well, I'm taking her to the malt shop and then to a movie. It Lies Beneath is playing. Yes, I'm gonna wear my Letterman jacket. I practically sleep in it. No, Kevin, I don't need advice knowing your track record. She's so beautiful and sweet, I don't want to mess this up. Joey gets to Susie's house and gets out of the car and looks at himself one more time in the mirror before he heads up to the door to get Susie. After picking up Susie, Joey and her head off to the malt shop, where they share a chocolate milkshake and some french fries. After getting done, they went to the movies. Joey and Susie pull into the drive-in to watch the movie It Lies Beneath, a scary movie that Joey is excited to see, but Susie is a little scared. After parking the car, Joey and Susie go and get some snacks and drinks and return to the car just in time for the movie to start. Joey takes a drink of his soda and then looks at Susie and says, "Hey Susie, you know if you get scared, you can come over here and I'll hold you in my arms." Susie smiles and scoots over to Joey, and he puts her in his arms. Now feeling safe since, he he takes a drink of his soda and starts watching the movie with her. After leaving the drive-in, Joey and Susie head to her house. Along the way, Joey and Susie are making small talk, and that's when Joey hears a popping sound, pulls over, and realizes that he now has a flat tire on his dad's car. "Gosh darn it to heck!" Joey says as he looks at Susie and lets her know that they got a flat tire. "Dad is gonna kill me!" Worried that they would be stranded, Susie wraps herself in Joey's Letterman jacket.
What are you going to do, Joey? All service stations are closed.
Getting frustrated and remembered his dad never replaced a spare tire, Joey was about ready to give up until he spotted a house deep into the forest on the side of the road. "There's a house up there. Maybe they might have a phone. We could call for a tow." Susie objects.
No, Joey, it's too scary. You know what happened in that house.
"Baby, relax. There might be new owners up there. They might be cool."
I guess you're right, Joey. It has been 50 years since that murder took place. Let's go check it out and see if we can get help.
And so, Joey and Susie head up to the house. The wind blows wildly and causes the shutters to bang loudly, causing Susie to jump. "It's okay, Susie. It's just the wind," said Joey. They walk up to the front door. Susie clutches onto Joey's arm tightly as Joey gets ready to knock on the door. Before Joey's knuckles could touch the wood, the door creaks open, but nobody is behind it. Pushing the door open, they step inside. The interior of the house was of old Victorian descent. Dust and cobwebs strewn about the house, and the furniture was covered with white sheets, and darkness blankets the rest of the two-story house. "Wow," Joey said in awe. "This place is cool. This could almost be like Grandma's house." A cold chill blows within the house.
Joey, this place is too creepy. Let's get out of here.
Susie protested. "Nonsense," Joey said. "I bet this joint could be fun to explore."
But Joey, I'm scared.
Joey grabs Susie's hands. "Baby, it's okay. I will protect you." Susie sighs and says,
Okay, dear, I trust you. Let's go.
Susie and Joey head upstairs to explore the second floor. They see about 4 doors, 2 to the left, 2 to the right. All of them seem to look like they have suffered from dry rot and aged badly, except for one door at the end of the left hallway. This door was still whole and pristine, as if it had been the only part of the house that hasn't been touched, or at least been refurbished over time. Slowly, Joey turns the knob and opens the door. They both look inside, and it's the master bedroom, complete with a full-size bed, a chest of drawers to the side, a vanity and armoire adorned the room, and not a speck of dust, cobwebs, or signs of age had touched this room. It was like every little girl's dream. The couple were shocked at the sight. How could the whole house be in the state of condemnation, yet this room, in particular, is still whole? Before any more thought could come up, Joey already ran up and hopped onto the bed.
Joey, get off of there this instant.
Susie said. "Come on, Suze. It's just the 2 of us. I'm sure nothing bad can happen," Joey said.
But I'm pretty sure this is where the murder happened.
"That's the past, babe." But before Susie can say anything else, they both heard a noise that made them jump, and Susie says,
Let's get out of here.
as she starts heading downstairs. "Hey, Suze, wait for me!" Joey calls out. Joey catches up to Susie as they head for the front door. But as they get there, they hear another noise causing them to stop, and then the house starts shaking. They look at each other, and then look towards the kitchen to see a giant eyeball staring at them through the window. Just then, Susie lets out a scream while Joey is still frozen in fear and can't believe what he is seeing. Suddenly, there was a little more shaking, and they turn to see the left side of the house disappear. In fear, they try to escape, but they can't. Suddenly, they see a 5-year-old little girl standing where the wall once was. All of a sudden, the little girl says,
"Oh, Mommy and Daddy, thank you so much for my new dollies. I can't wait to play with them. I'm going to have so much fun."
I only knew Michelle for a month, but it was truly a month to remember. I first met her when she was carving out my high school bully's eye with a butter knife, and we were more or less inseparable after that. She was a few years older than me, so, of course, I fell instantly in love. But I knew deep down we were destined for friendship and little else. I knew this because she made it clear that she was going to die in roughly a month. "Can't love a dead chick," she'd say. At first, I thought it was just a clever way to avoid the awkwardness of turning me down, but at some point, I came close to believing her. It was just something about her. Something extremely free, careless, and unconfined. Refreshingly brave and outspoken and honest. When I met her, I was going through the most depressing period of my life. I was constantly bullied and belittled at school. My younger twin sisters were both hospitalized, each needing a transplant to survive. Jenna needed a heart, Chloe needed kidneys. And my parents had their hands full covering the medical expenses. I think in our own ways, we were all on the verge of just giving up, of just letting go. I was saved by Michelle. I have no doubt about it. I was just so sick of it. Sick of the beating, sick of the abuse, sick of being alone. But Michelle came out of nowhere, threw him into the wall, knocked his nose halfway up his brain, and proceeded to dig out his left eye with the aforementioned cutlery. He never touched me again. You'd think she'd get into trouble after doing something like that, but it was never reported. Brett claimed it had been an accident, that he'd crashed with his moped. I think he feared that Michelle would kill him if he said otherwise. I, for one, have no doubt that she would have. That was just who she was. Michelle never went to school. She said it was because she knew she was going to die. Why bother with stuff like school, then? No. She was all about enjoying life to the fullest, kicking people in the face, screwing over people who screwed over others. She wanted to leave this world a better place than she found it. And, by her logic, this was done exclusively by ridding it of douchebags, one way or another. "How do you know you're gonna die?" I asked her once. "My parents tell me," she said, "every day, and they're good for their word." She wouldn't explain it in detail, just that she was raised knowing the exact date and time of her death, down to the very second, and that it was meant to be. That's what they told her. In death, her life would have meaning. At first, I didn't think much of it, you know. She was just a crazy girl, and she always said weird stuff like that. I was kind of banking on it all being some bizarre joke or something, but when the month drew to a close, I was getting really worried that it might all be true. I'd grown too attached to her. Every minute I wasn't at school or the hospital was spent with her, and the thought of losing her, my only friend, made me horribly depressed. That last week, I was really on edge. The twins were in bad shape, and my parents were spending every waking minute at the hospital. They had yet to find any donor matches, and time was running out. It felt like my time was running out too. The dark thoughts were returning. I found it strange that she never invited me home. I mean, friends do that, right? Invite each other over. She'd been to our house several times, even crashed on the couch a few times, and we would often watch movies there. Raid my parents' liquor cabinet, get wasted, and generally just have fun. But I'd never been to her house. Not once. I didn't even know where she lived. So one night, I just decided to follow her. What was there to lose, really? Maybe I could get some answers from her parents or something. Some way to explain why she was so convinced she was dying. Maybe they lied to her? Some sort of cult? A way to form her beliefs into accepting the unacceptable. A way to control her. I stalked her for 30 minutes, lurking in the shadows as she paced down the streets. When she headed to the outskirts, I started getting worried, and when she took the narrow trail through the forest, I was almost having a full-on panic attack. Where the hell was she heading? As far as I knew, there weren't any houses for miles. About halfway into the forest, I suddenly lost her. It was like she vanished without a trace. I walked back and forth, up and down, but there was just no sign of her at all. Eventually, I had to give up and return home, my mind growing ever darker. I remember the last day like it was yesterday. Every minute of it, crisp and clear and vivid in my mind. Every scent, every sound, every muscle moving on her perfect face, all those smiles and kind words. Everything. The last day came and went, but I didn't know it was the last day. If I'd known, I would have told her how much I cared for her, how much she meant to me, how much I owed her my life and my sanity. Without her, I wouldn't be alive. But I didn't know, and I never told her. I hope she somehow realized it, that she could see it in my eyes and actions every day, but I can never be sure. She just acted so normal, you know? She was Michelle that day too. Same carefree spirit, the same wild, devil-may-care attitude. We spent the afternoon smoking weed, watching silly cartoons, laughing, and just enjoying each other's company. But when she left, I knew something was up. I don't know how. I guess there was just some detail, some little thing that alarmed me, but having replayed and analyzed that day over and over in my mind, I can't think of anything. Nothing. But I knew. So, I followed her again. This time I stayed closer, always having her in my sights, always knowing exactly where she was. She was walking considerably slower that night, almost like she knew I was behind her. Almost like she wanted me to follow her. The air was cold and crisp, and whenever autumn draws close, I can step outside, take a deep breath, and relive the exact moment when she suddenly turned on her heels to face me. "This is it," she said. "This is the day I die." She walked over to me and handed me an envelope. It was light, but there was definitely something in it. A letter, perhaps. "You will need this." She stroked my hair gently. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it." "I don't understand," I said. "Please, let's just leave. Let's just get out of here." She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. If I concentrate real hard, I can still conjure up the smell of her perfume. "This is goodbye," she murmured softly, "but you will come to understand that it was always meant to be." I reached out to hug her when they emerged from the darkness. 2 tall figures clad in dark robes. An old man and an elderly woman, their milky white hair flowing gently in the breeze. They had this solemn expression on their faces, the kind you'd see in funerals. An expression of acceptance to sorrow and despair because it's just a part of life. Michelle pushed me away forcefully, and by the time I'd regained my balance, it was already too late. Her throat had been slit from either side of her neck. A perfect cross, left to right, right to left. Blood was squirting out, coloring the dull brown of the roadside a deep shade of crimson. The robed couple swiftly stepped back into the shadows, leaving me desperately clutching the lifeless body of Michelle, screaming my lungs out, wailing like an animal into the cold night. The paramedics came 10 minutes later. I have no idea who called them. Anonymous, they later told me. She had no ID on her, so they asked me a bunch of questions. I didn't know how to answer any of them. She was Michelle. That was all I knew. Her name was Michelle. She was my friend, and the best person I'd ever met. They let me ride the ambulance to the hospital, but they quickly pronounced her dead. She'd lost too much blood, they told me. It wasn't my fault. There wasn't anything I could have done. This didn't offer me much comfort. I was devastated. Totally broken, the dark thoughts resurfacing once again, this time with more power than ever before. "What's in your hand?" one of the paramedics asked. "Does that belong to Michelle?" I glanced at the envelope. It was completely drenched in blood, much like me. And then, it suddenly hit me. I don't know what it was, but it was like she told me. When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it. So, without thinking, I just handed it over to him. He sort of held it up, like he'd somehow see through it if he got a better angle of it before he gently opened it. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. I am better now. I still have problems understanding what happened, but I'm better. I have come to terms with it, with the fact that everything happened just the way it was supposed to happen. And it has shaped me, shaped my life into what I am today. Michelle didn't just save me. She saved my entire family, every aspect of my life. And I guess you're wondering what was in that envelope. Maybe you figured it out, maybe not. Well, it was a donor card. And, as it turned out, she was a perfect match for my twin sisters. "Can't love a dead chick," she'd said. That was the only thing she was ever wrong about.
Halloween used to be my favorite time of the year. I was kind of a horror freak. I loved horror novels, movies, and games. I spent hours absorbing all the YouTube creepypasta stories I could find. But that all changed one Halloween night when myself and a few friends found something that would change our lives forever. This is the story of the Dead House. I always did love that era of chaos that presents on Halloween night. That twisted, festive feeling that adds a spark of excitement to an otherwise dark and dreary time of the year. We were too old to be trick-or-treating, but we still wanted to wander the streets and soak up the atmosphere. Besides, there's a lot you can get away with in costume, especially when you pour your bottle of adult beverage into a Mountain Dew bottle and label it spooky juice. Our buddy Spike had comprehensively won our internal costume contest with his own homemade proton pack and Ghostbusters jumpsuit. He'd spent weeks on it, watching little YouTube painting tutorials and binge-watching the movies for minor details. It looked amazing, and he wasn't about to miss out on the opportunity to show the thing off. So off we went, wandering around the neighborhood and eating store-bought candy. Since we were way too old to be trick-or-treating, part of the fun of these Halloween walkabouts was seeing the spectacular ways that fellow Halloween enthusiasts had decorated their houses. Over the years, it became something of a competition, and each year the decorations became more and more elaborate. I remember one family had gone as far as digging a small pit in their front lawn. They put some red lights in there, then covered the thing over with wooden boards that were complete with fake zombie fingers reaching out between the slats. It looked amazing, and we found ourselves joining a gaggle of parents and taking selfies with the chillingly original decoration. We saw some pretty impressive stuff that evening, from fake bodies hanging from trees to chained-up dogs that had been dressed up as adorable little hounds. But nothing caught our attention like the house at the end of Bachman Street. So a lot of you have heard of these hell houses that crop up around Halloween every year. The most infamous being these guerrilla operations where people can make a few bucks while indulging in a little of the Halloween spirit. So when you saw the house at the end of Bachman Street with its doors wide open, we figured it was just part of the display. A couple was heading away from the house looking pretty scared, so we asked them what the deal was with the front door being left open. "Oh man, they really went all out this year," one of the pair said. "It's so realistic in there. We left a few dollars on the table as a thank you. There's no tip jar anywhere, so you guys gotta see it though." On that, we agreed. Something that was actually scary, right here in our own neighborhood? We had to see it. We studied the house intently as we wandered down the street towards it. The facade was barely decorated compared to the others we'd seen. Just a carved pumpkin and a few plastic hanging skeletons were all we could see on approach. But there was something odd about the way the cars were parked in the driveway, something weirdly chaotic. Anyway, we wander up to the front door, peering inside before entering. But again, there doesn't seem to be any extensive decoration on the inside either. That all changes once we enter the kitchen. One of the dining chairs was dripping with gore. Ropes around the armrests hanging freely as they'd been cut away from someone's arms. Laid on the table nearby were all kinds of bloody kitchen utensils, some still clogged with shredded flesh. Flies buzzed around us, landing on the body and various bloodstains around the room. "Wow," one of us said softly. "You can see where they use corn syrup to make the blood. Houseflies love that stuff." "But how did they get that kind of stink up in there?" another asked. But we didn't put too much thought into it. We were so overwhelmed and impressed that we just carried on moving through the house. The living room was somehow even more disturbing than the kitchen. Sat on a small, dark wood coffee table was a kind of homemade doll. It was a cluster of roots and twigs, all bound and woven together with reeds and dry grass. The face of the thing was made of clay, a single shiny stone pushed into it, resembling a kind of cyclopean eye. Arranged around it in a perfect circle were severed fingers, toes, and plucked out eyes. There was also a cluster of dollar bills from the couple's recent visit. I took out my wallet, taking out a few old singles before asking around to see if my buddies had anything to leave as a kind of thank you. There must have been about $14 in ones and twos in my hand by the time I let it drop onto the coffee table. "Now come on, let's see the upstairs, then get out of here. This place is giving me the creeps," I said. My buddies wouldn't let me hear the end of it. Scared by a family-run hell house. What an idiot. But when we saw the kids' bedroom, they were scared too. Inside, sitting among a carpet of stuffies and kids' toys, was a man. At first, all we could see was the back of him. He had long, thin gray hair and had somehow fit himself into a little girl's pink, frilly nightgown. We all froze in the doorway, staring wide-eyed as the creepy-looking old guy just sat there, playing with the toys, putting on little childish voices as he played at making them talk to one another. It was one of the most disturbing things I'd ever seen in my entire life. Whoever had thought that character up must have had one seriously disturbed imagination. The man turned still as a statue for a moment, sensing our presence behind him. When we turned, we saw his milky white eyes and blackening teeth, and ran for the door. We weren't exactly terrified, but we were still spooked and laughing nervously to ourselves as we bounded back into the street outside. But as we began to walk back out of the cul-de-sac road, blue and red lights began to flash before our eyes. It was the cops, screaming down past us down the street before rushing into the house we'd just left. There was nothing remotely fake about that house. The old man was an escaped psychiatric patient who had lived in the house as a child. The newspapers said he busted out of the institution he was being held in before he walked 30 miles into town back to his childhood home. He must have thought the people living there were intruders. At knife point, he tied them up and tortured them till he finished them. We never found out what happened to the kids inside the house, and quite frankly, I'm not sure I could handle it.
Looking out your window on Halloween night, you may just spot a figure tall and lean, with a gaunt face and blackened eyes. Such a bizarre sight to be seen. He walks among the field bathed in full moonlight. You've heard the tale of this creature before, and for those who fail to heed it, it never ends well. So listen close and use your wit. This is the story of a scarecrow that goes from door to door in search of people who do not believe anymore. To those who do, sweets he will leave. But to those who scoff and snicker, horrible things you would not believe. You picked out your costume for the big night. You carved your pumpkin with special care, and even hung up orange and black streamers to flutter in the air. Your brother, however, laughed at your delight. He didn't go trick-or-treating with you that night. After the festivities, you went to bed and fell fast asleep. Later, you were woken up by the oddest sound. You open your eyes and are terrified by what you have found. The Scarecrow looms over your brother's bed. His clawed hand hangs over his head. First, he plucks out your brother's eyes. Then he yanks out his spleen. He crunches on his fingers and toes, and finishes by picking his bones clean. Last, the Scarecrow turns his pale white face to you. You lay frozen in your bed, terrified of what he will do. He takes 3 steps towards you and reaches into his pocket. He takes out a handful of candy and drops them in your lap. He grins with pointed teeth, then slips out your window to the garden beneath. The lesson here is a simple one. Celebrate Halloween with cheer and good fun. Do these things, and he will give you a treat. Carve your jack-o'-lanterns and dress up like monsters, for you never know where he wanders. If you look down on the festivities, it's Scarecrow Sam you will meet.
I want to tell you about my best friend, my ex-best friend. Her name is Leslie, and we've known each other since we toddled and drooled, repeating one-syllable words in frustration. Leslie was a normal kid. We'd collect lightning bugs in the summer, tell ghost stories in the fall, sing Christmas carols in the winter, and pick up flowers in the spring. Once upon a time, the strangest thing about Leslie was her father. Leslie's dad used to drink a lot. Everyone on our street knew it. What everyone didn't know was that he blamed Leslie for her mother's death. Leslie was alone with her mom when it happened. Her mom had an allergic reaction, and Leslie panicked. Instead of picking up the phone and dialing 911, she just stood there and watched her mother fade away. She was 8 years old, and her dad never forgave her for it. Before his drinking got to be a problem, My mom would sometimes let me stay the night at Leslie's. As she helped slip my backpack over my shoulders before I left for the evening, she'd say, "Now there's a lot of heartbreak at Leslie's house, and what does heartbreak do to people, Cameron?" "It makes them act funny." "How so?" she'd ask, eyeing me carefully. "It makes them say and do things they don't mean." "What sort of things do they say?" "Hurtful things that don't feel good to listen to or repeat." "Right. And what do you do if this happens?" "Shut my ears." "And if it gets really bad, or if someone does something bad, call you and you will come get me." "That's right, my girl. Now have fun and be good to Leslie." Leslie's dad had no qualms about shouting cruel things at his daughter in the presence of company, but back then it wasn't a day-to-day occurrence. When we turned 13, Leslie shifted into the sullen girl whose anger had become an entity all on its own. She'd lash out at any perceived notion of a slight or abandonment. Her behavior drove a wedge between us. A couple months shy of my 14th birthday, I started avoiding my childhood best friend altogether. My mom smartened up to her absence and eventually asked about Leslie. I denied that anything had happened between us, but moms always know. "Why don't you have Leslie sleep over on your birthday?" "I know you may think that you can find another Leslie, but best friends aren't disposable, Cameron. There are many years put into your relationship with her. Do you really want to throw all of that away because she's having issues? You and I both know her home life is awful." With a guilty conscience, I phoned Leslie and invited her to spend the night on my birthday. We hung out sporadically in the days leading up to the slumber party, but it was kind of awkward, almost like a hangout with a stranger. When the day I turned 14 arrived, I drifted to class in a state of constant dread. At home, my mom stocked the pantry with popcorn, candy bars, and soda. On the counter, she stuck candles into my birthday cake. "I can cook or order pizza. Your choice, birthday girl. You know what I'm going to pick." "Pizza it is." "Hey, how have you and Leslie been? Any better?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I feel like I'm walking into a wall, trying to make things normal. I'm proud of you for fighting for your friendship. At least you can say you made an honest effort." The doorbell rang. I felt nervous, like I'd invited the captain of the cheerleading squad to stay the night instead of the girl I'd known for pretty much all my life. I fluttered to the front door and pulled it open. Leslie balanced a birthday present and a pumpkin in her arms. "Happy birthday, again, I mean." We had 2 classes together, and she'd already told me happy birthday. "Thanks," I said awkwardly and moved aside so she could squeeze through the door. We marched into the kitchen where my mom was on the phone with the pizza place. "Supreme's good, Cam?" "Hi, Leslie." "Yeah," I answered. "Hey, Mrs. Roche," Leslie said as she placed her things on the counter. "Supreme, Leslie?" my mom asked. Leslie nodded. "I guess we can head upstairs. Mom will call us down when the pizza's here." Single file, we climbed up the stairs and entered my bedroom. "I brought the pumpkin for carving later," Leslie said after a few tense seconds. "It was a stupid idea. I don't know what I was thinking." "No, not as stupid at all," I explained, overcompensating with emotion. "I mean, my birthday's in October, so it makes perfect sense." "I'm sorry, Cameron," Leslie whispered out of the blue. "It's just my dad. I don't know." Warmth flooded my body. The wall was crumbling. "We can make this work again." "I know, Les. Your dad, he's a dick." "I'm sorry, too. I'm a selfish asshole. You needed me, and I ran for the hills." Leslie smiled weakly as she pulled her backpack off. "I'm so happy I came." "Me too." We spent the next hour gossiping and playing Mario Kart. We laughed and fed off each other's energy like there was never a lull in our friendship. When the pizza arrived, we raced down the stairs and planted ourselves on the sofa. While we ate, my aunt and baby cousin arrived, stuffed to the gills with carbs. A little later, everyone encircled me and belted out a severely out-of-tune version of Happy Birthday. Once we devoured some cake, my mom passed out my gifts. I ripped each open until none were left, content with the book, video game, and sweater I collected. It was well past my cousin's bedtime now. and she vocalized at this point with loud, unhappy screams. My aunt gathered her things and kissed me goodnight, wishing me happy birthday one more time before she left. Leslie and I helped my mom clean up the mess in the living room. We attempted to help her clean up the kitchen, too, but she shooed us away. Go have fun, it's your birthday, for crying out loud. Back upstairs we giggled as I popped Indigo Prophecy into the Xbox. An hour into the game, Leslie's carefree attitude dissolved into a pensive mood. You okay? Yeah, I forgot to give you your birthday present. Oh, I guess I forgot too. I'll be right back. She scurried out of the room wearing a worried look. Why is she so worried over a birthday present? She knows me better than my own family does. Surely she picked out something awesome. Even if she didn't, who cares? I'll still appreciate it, I thought to myself. A minute later, Leslie returned, juggling the square box covered in a balloon wrapping paper and the pumpkin. I wonder how Mom overlooked it, I said. Oh, I moved it before we had cake. I wanted to give it to you when we were alone. So I hid it in the hall closet, but then we got sidetracked with the game, and Leslie sniffed and straightened out her slightly curled up lips. Something was off about her. A minute ago she seemed worried, but now she seemed excited. Why was she acting so weird? I want to say a couple of things before you open it, she said as she handed me my present. I shrugged. Sure, go ahead. She drew a deep breath and hugged the pumpkin. Like I started to say earlier, things have been really bad with my dad lately, worse than usual. I tingled with guilt. How could I have left Leslie to deal on her own? He's been drinking nothing but liquor lately, and he's started to do other things, new things. A jolt of anger tore through me. What things? What are you saying, Leslie? Leslie's cheeks reddened. I suddenly felt ill, like I was going to puke. I forget it. It doesn't matter. I gritted my teeth. You have to tell me. If he's hurting you, you have to tell me. We can fix this, I promise. You aren't alone. Leslie leered, but I was alone for months. I hung my head in shame. I know. Neither of us spoke. My head was reeling. I'd have to tell my mom. Her dad had never gotten physical in any way before. This was where my mom would have to draw the line. She should have drawn it long before now, but she'd been scared of what would happen to Leslie if she became a ward of the state. Leslie's red face brightened. It's your birthday. Let's just focus on that for now. How could she say that with the bomb she just dropped? When I got home from school today, I had this idea that I'd create an experience we could share together. Just go ahead and open it. I can't stand the suspense. She gnawed on her lip and drummed the pumpkin with her fingernails. Leslie, I'm not trying to be rude, but this present is kind of the last thing on my mind right now. I know you don't want to, but we need to tell my... No. I want you to open your gift. Her eyes flashed angrily. I sighed. Reluctantly, I peeled away the wrapping paper. Leslie's leg jiggled in anticipation as she watched me open the box. Inside was something very hairy and wet. What? As my brain caught up with my eyes, my body jerked, flinging the box out of my hands. It sailed into the air momentarily before spilling its contents onto the floor. It took a few seconds for it to register who it was I was seeing. Leslie's dad's head lay on the floor, his mutilated face dramatically different. His eyes and nose were gouged out and carved into triangles. His mouth was slit from ear to ear, sawed into jagged flaps of shredded flesh. The top portion of his head had flopped off and tumbled to the floor, leaving a gaping hole in place of his scalp and forehead. See? First, I cut the top off. Then I pulled out all the gooey stuff. Those were the hard parts. The work no one really enjoys doing. But then came the fun part, the actual carving. Leslie was grinning wildly, her voice oddly giddy. That's when it came to me to bring you my surprise. I had this pumpkin out on the doorstep, so I brought it too. That way we'd both get to carve something on your special day. I'd lost the ability to speak. I couldn't understand what I was hearing, what was happening in my bedroom and with the girl I'd known all my life. Did you like it, Cam? she asked. There was fire in her eyes that was fueled by cruelty. I clutched at my throat. I couldn't take my focus off her dad's head, no matter how disgusted I was. Leslie bent over and picked it up, offering me a close-up view of the interior of his hollow skull. My teeth chattered as I pushed her arms away and ran to the door. "Cam, wait! You still have to do yours." I was gone, though. When I reached my mom, I fainted at her feet. Leslie's locked up in a mental institution an hour away. Motivated by guilt, I went to see her once before deciding I'd never go again. The administration almost refused to let me visit, but in the end, allowed it. She was seated on a couch in front of the TV. She was sedated, I think, because she barely reacted when I stepped into her line of vision. "Hey, Leslie," I mumbled. I was afraid to sit next to her, so I remained standing. She didn't seem surprised or angry or anything as she blinked at me. I just don't know. This was a bad idea. Never mind." She said nothing mean, happy, or neutral as I began to walk away. Right as I rounded the corner to enter the hallway, I heard her call. "I almost carved you instead, but it was your birthday."
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please do share with your friends or social media and leave a review. Come and chat with my friends and I on Saturday nights at 10 p.m. in the Creature Features YouTube chat room while we watch campy B-rated movies on Saturday nights. We have a lot of fun. Just visit www.creaturefeatures.tv for the link. For more information on Spooky Boo and the creepy, scary stories I tell on my podcasts, visit www.scarystorytime.com, where you can find stories about fun, dark topics in the paranormal to scare you. These podcasts include Spooky Boo's Scary Storytime, where I write my own horror stories for the world to hear, Creepypasta Scary Stories written by other people, and Creepy California True Scary Stories, which include scary stories from all over the world told from my studio in California. Subscribe to one or subscribe to them all. To support the show and get all stories in one feed, visit www.spookyboo.club. That's all for tonight. I'll see you in your nightmares.
All beds and blankets are welcome on frosty October nights. The one tightly wrapped around Stephen was his favorite, a blue-green fuzzy wool blanket given to him on his 7th birthday. Friendly, warm hands breezed through Stephen's hair. The shine of her smile pierced through the ink of the blackened room. "Now you stay in bed, Stephen. Get some good rest so you can enjoy all of that candy tomorrow." She lifted her hand. A worried Stephen gripped her sleeve in rebellion. "Do I have to sleep without the light?" His stammering making it difficult for his mother to understand. Thumbing the small frog-shaped light in her hand, she spoke softly. "You turned 9 almost a month ago now. You'll be fine." Her tenderness calmed Stephen. "Just close your eyes and think about all the fun you and little Sarah will have tomorrow morning." "All right." His voice wobbled. His mother then leaned forward, her warm lips pressed against Stephen's forehead. Before leaving the room, she turned with cozy eyes. "Good night, Stephen." "Good night." The door shut, leaving Stephen with only moving shadows and an endless void sitting fatly in the corners of his room. He peered over to his left to a green analog clock. 9:34 p.m. It was going to be a long night. It took him a while to drift to sleep. With the constant distraction of beasts and monsters floating through his head. His imagination wasn't going to be kind to him tonight. Every toy was a massive, pregnant insect, finding its way across the carpet to its next living womb. Every slight movement of a shadow was a bloodthirsty creature stalking its next prey. However, despite his quiet terror, He eventually fell asleep, preoccupying himself with the treasure of tomorrow's yearly bounty. Crust covered Stephen's eyes and made it difficult to see when he first awoke, but he knew it was the dead of night. Eventually his vision steadied, and he attempted to turn his head to read the time, but he couldn't. His neck was locked in place. Terrified and confused, he tried to stretch his arms out to grasp at the blanket, but in vain. He couldn't move a muscle on his body. Suddenly, he saw an odd shape. It took him a second to calm down and focus. From one of the deepest corners of his room, there appeared to be a softly sobbing child no older than him. He was squatting, and he was astonishingly malnourished. The sobbing only lasted for a second after Stephen laid his eyes on him. For a moment, there was nothing. Stephen couldn't cry out, flee, or even close his eyes in fear. The constant sound of the wind blowing through the trees stopped, and for only a moment, Stephen's pounding heart silenced. Slowly, the sobbing started again and became louder. Soon, what was once a light whimper was now a full scream, then becoming an ear-piercing, inhuman screech. What originally sounded like pain in the child's wails changed to hunger, then anger. At its peak, it sent waves of agony through Stephen's head, like hot pins being driven into his ears. It took all of his might, but Stephen, armed with determination, finally snapped his eyes shut. When he did, all was quiet. Suddenly, sounds started to cascade around young Stephen. A timid rustling of fabric, a soft pittering of footsteps coming closer and closer to the foot of his bed, and finally, the sound of labored, dry breathing. Then more breathing. Then more. Then more. Then more and more. It soon sounded as though a dozen dying dogs circled Stephen's bed, panting with dusty throats. At this point, Stephen couldn't handle the pressure. He opened his eyes. All he found was the child at the foot of his bed. In this new light, Stephen could see ribs jutting out of the small child's chest. His skull was clearly visible through his tight scalp. And despite the feeble nature of the child's limbs, he continued to climb forward, coming closer. Stephen could see more details. The child didn't look angry or scary. He looked sad and tired. His eyes were as dead as a fish's, yet were overflowing with misery. Whatever flesh was still left on his face was slumped. His limbs were audibly cracking and creaking with each movement. Abruptly, the sense of terror Stephen was feeling was gone. When he looked at the sickly boy, he could only feel deep sadness. Any anxiety or fear suddenly melted away. Poor thing. So hungry and cold, Stephen thought, nearly unwillingly. Abruptly, the child's march towards Stephen stopped. His face hardened. The depression now turned to sternness. Then rage. Small, snake-like shapes started to coil under the boy's skin. Its ribs snapped and pushed at the walls of its chest, trying to rip their way out. Between the squirming of the rib cage, its organs pumped and pulsed grotesquely like alien bugs writhing. Its eyes widened to twice their original size, now gleaming with an animalistic madness. Its jaw opened. It was lined with jagged, chipped teeth. It opened so wide that Stephen could see down its spasming, scarred throat. Stephen couldn't keep his eyes off of this horror. His mind was so engulfed with dread that he couldn't even wish himself to safety. What felt like an eternity may have only been seconds, but it was all the same to Stephen. But it just sat there, waiting. Its breathing, a beastly rasp. Its organs and strange movements underneath its skin now slowed to a crawl, a stark contrast to the violent thrashing. The eyes of the beast pierced through Stephen like a bullet drilling into his forehead. Primal alarms blasted through his head, but any reactionary movements would be in vain. He was still frozen. Its legs shifted slightly, its head bobbed, and its arms planted themselves firmly on the bed. It was going to lunge. Stephen was aware of this, and his brain fought as it had never fought before. He used every last willing cell in his brain to demand his body to move, even if it was only a finger, to no effect. Mentally exhausted, he accepted his fate. The creature lunged at Stephen, its jaws widened to fit his entire head down its gullet. But before it could swallow Stephen whole, everything went black. Through the darkness, Stephen could hear the sounds of plastic rustling, then ripping. Sickly crunches were coming from his closet, his candy. He opened his eyes and reluctantly peered over to his closet. He jumped out of his covers and grabbed a flashlight that was laying below his bed. As he approached the ajar closet door, he noticed 2 small feet with pink socks. It was his sister. Stephen swung open the door to find his younger sister in the middle of eating a Snickers bar. "Hey, that's mine!" "Get out!" Stephen sleepily slurred. With wide eyes, his sister quickly jumped out of the closet and ran for the door. With the pest gone, Stephen was left alone, thinking. At first, he considered a more secure hiding place for his candy. But the more he thought, the more something was bugging him. Something vague but powerful. Like a forgotten dream. He thought, and he thought, and he thought, but this one pestering memory just wasn't revealing itself. What little memory of this dream was scary to Stephen, so he decided to leave it as it was. After picking up the pillowcase full of candy, he turned over to his bed, but in doing so, he noticed a familiar corner. It suddenly struck him. The child. The screaming, the ribs, the mouth. He had remembered his dream. He frantically leaped towards the light switch and turned on the lights. Nothing. The corner was empty. Stephen sat on his bed, not daring to touch his candy to comfort him. His stomach churned. He laid down, knowing the bright lights above him would force him to stay awake. A few hours passed, and he laid there, thinking about what he saw in the dream. Eventually, morning came, and his nausea subsided, and he was allowed to enjoy his candy. Days passed. Details from the dream became fuzzy, and soon, the initial horror turned into fascination. Weeks passed. He forgot about the dream entirely. One day, weeks into summer, Stephen found himself in his bed late at night, neck locked into place, and unable to move a muscle in his body.
It's that time of year again. I know how I'm going to be spending Halloween. Same way I have for the past 2 years. Slowly nursing a beer in the bar. Watching the glass sweats on that smooth wooden counter, staring at it till it goes warm in my hand. I'm not there to get drunk. I'm there to escape. I never want to be alone at home over Halloween night again. I promised that deputy that I wouldn't talk about that night. The town didn't need it. Hell, I even deleted the video. But now, with Halloween around the corner, it all comes back. Well, small town law enforcement doesn't care too much about Reddit. Much less no sleep. I live in a small house at the end of the lane. Another nondescript house down a road of its sisters. Prefabricated mostly. Far enough off the beaten path to be cheap. Not so far as to be rural. But close. Pretty damn close. I didn't expect many kids to call around trick-or-treating come Halloween. It's a long road, and most children manage to fill their baskets long before they get to my place. Besides, I quite like the peace and quiet. Halloween used to be a good night to settle down and catch some of the classic horror movies on TV. I kept a couple of bags of candy around just in case some kids actually made it all the way down to the lane. But mostly, it would be an evening all to myself. I can't quite remember what I was watching that night. Probably because I'd been enjoying an after-dinner beer and I may have gotten carried away, dozing off after one too many. I woke with a start. My beer had gone warm on the side table, my hand still curling around the can. I winced as I unwrapped my fingers. Something had woken me up. The TV droned on in the background and senseless drivel of late-night programming flickered across the room. Maybe it was just some high school kids out after some Halloween party, out on the street making some noise that woke me up. I checked the time. Past midnight. I was glad that I invested in a little security for my house. Just the basics, really. A good camera to cover my front lawn. Motion-activated lights around the front and back. I was trying to make the tough decision of whether to clear up the mess right then and there, or to just kick the can down to the road till the next morning. When a loud rapping at the door shattered the silence. The can bounced off the floor, warm beer spraying across the bottom of my track pants. The shock left me too numb even to swear. I adjusted the can back upright when the knocking sounded again. That arithmetic rap, increasingly impatient, the tempo building up as I stepped towards the door. I peered around the edge of the window. I saw nothing but my pale face in the glass. It was pitch dark outside. Why wasn't the light working? The knocking stopped. A tree branch, perhaps, or something else tapping on the porch. The people glared at me. That little glass orb suddenly bulged with some half-promised horror. I swallowed, I tried. My throat was dry. The warm beer on the floor suddenly inviting. It's nothing, I said out loud, hoping that the familiar echo of my voice off the walls would ground me somehow. I walked up to the door and peered out, only seeing the orange cones cast by the halogen streetlights a distance away. Nothing, I thought to myself, feeling childishly stupid. I sucked in a deep breath, feeling my lungs strain then let the air stream out slowly. Then, another knock. I turned back around to face the door, my heart pounding at the inside of my chest, its crazed dance playing counterpoints to the knocking. I wasn't surprised to see my hand shake as I reached for the doorknob. Our town was a safe one, far from troubles of the big cities, or so we read in the papers. We had little more to fear in the night than seeing our trash strewn across the yard by the nimble fingers of raccoons. I threw the door open. The porch lights winked on, suddenly blinding me. I blinked away the white spots from my vision. A pair of children stood on my porch. They must have been 9 or 10. I couldn't see much of them, because they were in a classic Halloween getup. A simple sheet draped over each of them, a pair of holes cut out from them to see through. A pair of small baskets for candy broke the smooth lines of the sheets. The toes of brand new dress shoes peeked out from under the sheets. A boy and a girl, I thought. Trick or treat. Such a common refrain. I'd expected the words, but not the delivery. They were but 2 figures in front of me, yet their voices seemed to come from a great distance away. Trick or treat. The pair spoke again. I felt a little discomforted at the distortion in their voices. More than the weird volume, their voices seemed to blend into each other's, with some strange harmonics at play at the edges. It seemed as though there were a choir of 2 just there, speaking to me. Treat, I guess, I said. More than anything, I wanted those 2 away from my house. The whole situation felt wrong, the familiar veneer of the season concealing something deeper, something rotten, like that small panic when biting into a fruit and feeling the lack of resistance, your teeth sinking into soft mush instead of sweet flesh. For a moment, I blamed the haze of alcohol, the dregs of sleep clouding my judgment. But adrenaline had swept those far away. My fear was true. I turned to the counter where I kept my keys and grabbed for the bag of candy I'd prepared for the occasion. I was half hoping that the 2 figures would be gone when I returned to the door, that they'd been a figment of my imagination, perhaps a shadow of some dream brought on by creep horror movies and cold pizza. I had no such luck. The pair hadn't moved an inch. They each raised their baskets. There was already an assortment of candy there. They'd had a good day. A bit late for you guys to be out, isn't it? Where are your parents? The only answer I got was an impatient shaking of the baskets, the rasp of candy wrappers rustling. I held out a handful of candy, ready to drop it and call it a night. I expected to see a small, pale hand clutching at the handle of the basket. Instead, I saw the anemic, matte sheen of plastic. The basket was draped off the plastic hand of some kind of store mannequin. I was more than thoroughly creeped out by this effective little trick. I shrugged. Maybe the voices were recorded. A little technology to bolster an otherwise traditional costume. I felt the fear melting away as I explained it to myself in my head. Just some clever little children, probably with the help of an adult. Smart, I thought. It had certainly got me going for a while. Stay safe, I told them, dropping the last of the candy into the baskets. They didn't acknowledge me. They just stood still on the worn wooden boards of my porch. I shut the door on them. The window darkened as the light on the porch shut off. Odd. Maybe the motion detector stopped working. Some unbidden instinct told me to stay there and wait. I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch as the two walked off. Still, the light stayed dark. My relief grew as the odd strangers left the property. Still, something wasn't right. The light was working. It turned on when it detected me. It saw me. It didn't see the kids. The sensor was working. It was state-of-the-art, passive infrared, detected motion by detecting changes in temperature. Like a human body. Like mine, but not the kids. Whatever was under those pristine white sheets wasn't warm at all. The realization washed over me like an ice cube running down my spine. My breath came in short rasps. I had to see. I had to know. I could barely bring my hand to the curtains. They were shaking so bad. When I pinched the edge of the curtains between my thumb and my finger, the curtain began to undulate wildly. I filled my lungs and peered out through the glass. They were still there, barely 20 yards away, doing nothing. Just standing there, motionless, facing the street. As I watched, they both swiveled their heads in perfect tandem to affix 2 pairs of fathomless eye holes on the window. There was no way they could have seen me come to the window. I had to put the back of my hand in my mouth and bite down hard to keep from calling out. They knew I was there. I backed away from the window, dragging my leading feet over the carpeted floor. I barely noticed when my heel knocked the can back, the beer leaking out onto the carpet, leaving a widened patch in front of me. I couldn't believe the raw animal fear those two had summoned up in me. Every instinct I had told me to run. Run. Get help. Anything but stay and be trapped in my own house. What could I do? Call the police and tell them that I was scared of 2 little children trick-or-treating? Call one of my friends past midnight and ask them to come over, like a little boy crawling to his parents' room after a nightmare? The situation was ridiculous. My mind told me so. That there had to be a rational explanation for everything. But I could not explain away the light, fluttery feeling in my stomach. I could not rationalize the prickly lumps at the back of my throat. They'd only said 3 words to me, in those unearthly tones. Who knew how cold those lips were? I shut the door to the kitchen, the sound echoing through the empty house. I turned my chair to face the front door, and then I waited, white-knuckled, for the dawn to come. I must have fallen asleep sometime during that long, cold wait, not daring to move from my chair, paralyzed with fear that one of those shrouded children would appear at my window, or worse yet, behind me. But even the manic store of energy wore out as the night wound to a close. I was woken up by a polite knock on the front door. I sat bolt upright, nearly falling off my chair. I stumbled to the door, a hint of the dread from a few hours ago still lingering like a stale funk in the air. I checked the peephole again. This time, I was comforted with the well-scrubbed face of one of our town deputies. We'd been to school together. It was that kind of smallish town where you know almost everybody your age if they had history there. He was an earnest man, tough but fair. "Good morning, officer."
"Good morning,"
he replied. The sour look on his face told me that it was anything but that. His nose twitched as he took in the stale, sour smell of beer streaming off the floor in the morning sun.
"Had a good night last night?"
I thought back to the night before. No, I didn't. The lawman was quick to see the fleeting shadow of doubt wash across my face. He pressed home his advantage.
"You care to explain why you stole 2 mannequins from the store, dressed them up, and put them on your front lawn?"
He shifted to the side, and past his door-fitting bulk, I saw 2 familiar shapes on my lawn. My lungs wouldn't fill with air. They were still there. They'd been there the whole time.
"You okay, buddy?"
The big man leaned in, blocking my view, and steadied my shoulder with one of his strong hands. I brushed his hand off and lurched out into the yard, mindless of the freezing dew on my bare feet. The pair stood there, the draped sheets joined in between them. They were holding hands. The 2 of them were holding hands. I brought my palm down gingerly on the head of the one nearer to me. Hard. I felt it. I felt hard plastic. I whipped the sheet off with one smooth motion. I gave a strangled cry as I stared into the empty, green eyes of a child mannequin. I backed away. Too quickly. I ended up on my ass on the cold grass, clawing and scrambling backwards until I bumped into the solid legs of the deputy behind me. He'd been quick to recognize my unease earlier, and was just as quick to realize genuine fear. He hoisted me back to my feet and helped me back into my house.
"You mind telling me what all that was about?"
He dumped me onto the office chair in front of my computer. I tried, but I couldn't force the words out. The deputy sighed and settled onto my couch, wrinkling his nose at the empty beer cans on the side table. He leaned forward.
First call the morning after Halloween, and I'm chasing down some bullshit break into a store in the middle of town. Now I've got you hungover and scared shitless from a damn pair of dolls in your yard. What I know is someone got into the store, smashed up the glass, stole some sheets and a couple of mannequins. Fucking kids again. Except the glass.
The lines on his brow deepened. I watched his Adam's apple bob up and down.
The glass was on the outside of the shop only. You have a camera in your yard, don't you?
I nodded numbly.
What say you give me another 10 minutes of your time tops? We go through that footage, I see you put those things on your lawn, and then I'll be out of your life. Hopefully for good.
I turned to face my computer and call up the stored videos on my hard drive. They were all transferred by Wi-Fi. Convenient for the time that I bought the cameras.
Just put it on double speed backwards. We'll see who set them there soon enough.
I hit the reverse play key and upped the speed. I saw the 2 of us scuffle from the house to the lawn and back again. Then the first rays of sun retreating from the grass, pulling back over the pair of figures, until they were back in darkness. The 2 of them stood there, motionless, for the longest time. When the 2 figures moved, all by themselves, in a jerky, swaying motion back from my lawn to my front door, the cursor danced a little jig in the corner of the screen as the shakes returned, stronger than before. The sharp hiss behind me told me I wasn't alone in my discomfort. I shuddered as I watched myself on screen. So close to the two abominations, giving them a handful of candy each. I slowed the recording back to normal speed. On screen, I saw myself turn back into the house to retrieve the candy. The two figures stood there, impassive. As one, they both fixed those dark eye holes on the sheets on the camera. There was something else. Unmistakable. There was a slight pulse in the sheets. A small undulation. The mannequins were breathing.
I've seen enough.
I turned to look at the deputy, his face as white as the sheets on the shrouded figures on the screen. His hand tight around the grip of his sidearm. That, of all the things, scared me the most of all. A symbol of law and order who had seen the worst of what our little community has to offer. Just as scared as I was, and ready to pull a gun in my house. I clicked the window shut and got up. I wandered over to my cabinet. I pulled out a pair of tumblers and a bottle of the good stuff. The bottle gave a couple of contented glugs as I sloshed the rich golden whiskey into the glasses. I set one down in front of the other man and took a sip from my glass. A lawman could lose his job drinking on duty. The deputy didn't hesitate when he emptied half his glass. He didn't look at me when he spoke.
My Nana wasn't from around here. She was back from the old country across the sea. She hated Halloween. Said there were things out that night that weren't meant to be seen in the light of day. She told me that one single night of the year, some things were set loose. The candy and costumes were a new thing. Back in the past, on All Hallows Eve, good folk crossed themselves and prayed and stayed in. Whatever's on that recording, it's not what our town needs. You understand?
Dumb high school kids, I said, the lie taking shape and forming in my mouth, fooling around. The lie fleshed out, took on a veneer of credibility. That would be the explanation. No one had to know the dark kernel of that story.
And your camera was having technical difficulties.
Never was a good piece of equipment. Regretted buying it the same week. He stuck out his hand, and we shook on it. And I've kept my word to now. There isn't a good reason why I broke the promise. I'd never known true fear till that night. But I replay it in my head, over and over. The recording is long gone, of course, but every detail of that night has been branded on my mind. I remember the fear, but I cannot think of a single act the two of them had done to threaten me. Eerie, unnatural, but without a drop of malice. It'll be Halloween soon. I know where I'll be on that dark night. Some things roam the streets that shouldn't be there. The masks and costumes aren't always for the children. Sometimes they're there for the adults, for our own protection. After the deputy left, I watched the video forwards. Just once. I remember seeing the two figures on my lawn, slowly inching their hands up, locking them under the sheets, and waiting for the sun to rise. Things that shouldn't be out on this good earth. But sometimes, just Sometimes they just want the simple things, like one last trick or treat.
This happened to my husband back in 2007 on Halloween night. My husband called me to tell me as soon as this happened, and it's been boggling his mind ever since. He works for the railroad, and one night while on the train going south, he and his engineer passed through a small county, something he's done for 5 years, when something caught their attention. Up ahead, my husband saw someone lying on the tracks, and he told the engineer to slam on the brakes. The engineer saw the guy too, so he pulled the emergency brakes. But of course it takes about a mile for a train going 70 miles per hour to slow down. What they both saw was an older man with a beard, who was lying on his side facing the train. When the man saw the train as it got close, he put up both his hands in a defensive manner, and he had a frightened look on his face. Before they knew it, they slammed into the guy, and the train finally stopped. My husband and the engineer were shaken up, and my husband called his manager to tell him what had happened. He told them to call the local authorities and state troopers and so on. After everyone had showed up and they finally looked under the train, there was nothing. Nothing at all. My husband and the engineer were embarrassed because everyone was there to investigate, and there was nothing under the train. They swore that they had ran over the guy because they heard the thumping sounds as the train kept going. They walked back to the point of impact, and there was nothing. No blood, no clothes, no shoes. They called in the canines, but they couldn't pick up a scent. If they had hit someone and he ran off, there would have been blood or something, and I'm sure he wouldn't have gone very far. The local cops had told my husband and the engineer that there were a bunch of kids throwing mannequins off this bridge, so it was most likely just a mannequin. But that was impossible because of what they saw. So who knows what happened that night. My husband isn't much of a believer, and he isn't frightened by anything like this, or ghost stories for that matter. But it does make me wonder.
During the summer of 1983, in a quiet town near Minneapolis, Minnesota, the charred body of a woman was found inside the kitchen stove of a small farmhouse. A video camera was also found in the kitchen, standing on a tripod and pointing at the oven. No tape was found inside the camera at the time. Although the scene was originally labeled as a homicide by police, an unmarked VHS tape was later discovered at the bottom of the farm's well, which had apparently dried up earlier that year. Despite its worn condition and the fact that it contained no audio, police were still able to view the contents of the tape. It depicted a woman recording herself in front of a video camera, seemingly using the same camera the police found in the kitchen. After positioning the camera to include both her and her kitchen stove in the image, the tape then showed her turning on the oven, opening the door, crawling inside, and closing the door behind her. 8 minutes into the video, the oven could be seen shaking violently, after which point thick black smoke could be seen emanating from it. The camera then continued to stationary point at the oven for another 45 minutes, until the batteries apparently died. To avoid disturbing the local community, police never released any information about the tape, or even the fact that it was found. Police were also not able to determine who put the tape into the well, or why the physical stature of the woman on the tape did not in any way resemble the stature of the woman found in the oven.